Hello again and welcome to part 2 of Sunsets at East Hardwick. My picture's dry now and I'm quite happy with that. So now I'm going to put some grasses around the edge of the sun. Perhaps just before that I will maybe get rid of most of the white on the rest of this. So I've still got some of my colours left over from before and I can use all those up. So I think what I'll do is take some of the red. That was permanent rose. In fact, I'll mix a little bit more. Permanent rose with a little bit of cadmium yellow. A bit more red than yellow. And if I add some of that to my blue, it's going to make my blue go grayer. So I can use all that up in there and you'll see that blue becoming grayer now. It's just a good way of using up all the colours, and maybe just put a little bit of the orange in it as well. Not much. So that's looking quite nice and grey. And to start with, just using a smallish brush, just a little bit of water at the bottom, clean water at the bottom of the sun. And just take that down or out about 1/2 inch or so. Lower down, so just the lower part of the sun and then out about 1/2 inch. And then get some of your orange and put that in there, encouraging the orange to mingle a little bit, maybe just a touch stronger. And that will be the setting sun. And as we come out from there, just make that a little bit stronger, with stronger orange. I want it to blend quite nicely, just to soften. Don't really want any hard edges where the sun is, just nice and soft edged, maybe a bit of yellow even. Ooh. And encourage those to mingle, some of the orange with the yellow. And now as we come lower down, now I'll just put a bit of that grey with some of the orange. And then we can take that into the orange and encourage the orange and the brown to mingle a little bit. I'll use a bigger brush now. And you can use the orange, anything that's left from your red, it's gone a bit brownish now, you can use any of those colours. And the top of it, use the paint nice and wet on the dry paper. You don't need to wet the paper first. I mean, you can do if you want to, but I don't think it's essential. A nice mixture of all these colours. Now, where the horizon is, you can either kind of leave it flattish if you want a flattish horizon, or you could take it up a little bit here and there if you wanted hills, or if you wanted trees, make it a little bit bumpy. Could look like distant trees perhaps, way over on the horizon. And it doesn't matter if all this ends up a little bit blotchy, don't worry about that. Just get all this covered, and now I just need to keep my eye on the sun. Can you see some of the paint has crept into the white area? So I'm just going to push that back out again with my damp brush, make sure it's clean. I want to keep that white bit, it's very precious. And that sunlight looks quite intense now because of the powerful colours around it. Maybe a bit more orange in here. Yeah, so again, I'm just going to keep my eye on that sun and just fill in all the rest of this. Doesn't have to all be the same colour. It can be quite interesting if it's a variety of greys, reddish browns and all sorts. So there's no real sunlight on this lower bit, so it can be reasonably dark. But I'm going to go darker and darker with this, building up layers and layers of paint. And as I say, if you want to make the top of this a little bit uneven, it suggests things on the horizon like trees or bushes a long way away. Still want to keep my eye on that sun. The paint's creeping upwards, defying gravity. So I'm going to use a small brush just to keep tickling the paint and stop it from taking over the white area completely. Keep that white and bright. You can't get brighter than the white of the paper, so it's important that the sun occupies that white area. And it's already looking quite dramatic, I think. So while that's drying, I can use a brush with a good point. I've got a rigger here, so I can either use a rigger, or I could use this naught brush or any brush with a good point. Or this one's a little bit bigger. This is number 6, and it's still got a good point on it. And the grey that I put on here is not quite dry. It's just slightly damp. So if I put some of the damp orange into there at a slight angle, it's giving the impression. I don't want to go into the orange much, but only into the lower grey area. And then using probably a slightly finer brush now, using some of the orange and a steady hand. Now you're going to make some of these silhouetted plants. They don't know whether they're grasses or corn or wheat or what it is. I think on the photograph it's all sorts of things, and because it was autumn, it's sort of harvest time, so all the seed heads are full, and you can use the oranges and browns, reddish browns, all kinds of different variations. Where the sun is though, don't take anything into the sun, but keep the colours near the sun relatively pale and light. So oranges, and so here's a bit of something that's growing right next to the sun and above the sun, but I'm not going to go through the sun. I'm going to keep it above, and then once that orange area is dry, I'll carry some of those grass shapes on. So keep out of the sun. And using your brush at a slight angle, it suggests there's a breeze on these on the field, blowing the grasses from right to left. And when you're doing these, it can be very tempting just to kind of just do one after the other, after the other, after the other, without giving much thought. But do take your time and perhaps swap sides every so often. Change the colour very slightly every so often, and change the height of these and maybe the shape. So some of these you could do a few little blobs for seed heads. You don't have to connect them all, it's only an impression. Different angles, different oranges. You might want to make some slightly redder, some darker, but we'll go darker and darker lower down in particular. That's still a bit damp, that orange area, so I'm going to keep out of there for now until that's completely dry, and then work your way across, varying the height, varying the angle. Remember, there could be lots of things growing in front and across each other. But when you're doing something that's very repetitive, it's tempting just to kind of fill it all in quickly and just get it done. But what spoils paintings more than anything else is impatience. So take your time, don't rush this. And when you get fed up on one side, move over to the other. And as each layer of paint dries, once it's completely dry, then I'll mix some darker colour and we'll put some darker grasses in. But already this is beginning to look nice and striking in the middle here. Just need to be careful not to go too dark too early on, and I think with watercolour it's always safer to underdo the colour rather than overdo it. It's always easier to put more paint on than try and take paint off. I mean, you can take paint off. Watercolour is less forgiving than other paint mediums, and there are ways of correcting things. It's not quite as final as a lot of people think, but it's much easier to put more paint on than try and take paint off. And for me, what makes watercolour so exciting is the brightness and the spontaneity, the lightness, the transparency of the colour. What we're essentially doing is putting on layers of transparent or semi-transparent colour, allowing the white of the paper to shine through the paint. And so the more paint you put on, the less you allow that to happen. And so we need to be careful not to overdo things. I think I'm not too bothered about this lower area because it wants to be dark, and I will build up lots of layers of colour over the top of previous layers. But the sky, for example, to keep that nice and light, it doesn't want to be laboured, and that thin application of paint should just help it to look bright and clean looking. Watercolours can very easily get muddy and dirty if they're laboured. So that orange I think is just about dry. We're getting a bit more red in that orange, bit more, it doesn't matter which red. So it's a reddish, deep red orange, and then now coming in near to the sun, but not into the sun. And just stopping short of the sun. Underneath. And anything above, keeping out of the sun. I've done a number of paintings looking into the sun like this, and it fascinates me, the brightness and how these darks, it's really the darks and the powerful colours and tones that make the sun look so bright. There's strong contrasts. Well, I'm going to go on to a bigger brush now. I'll use the number 6. It's got a good point to it, so I can cover quite a large area with that, using the tip of my brush. I don't need to be quite as careful lower down as I did on the horizon. I'll just do a few more up at the top there. I can still go back to the horizon with the fine brush later if I need to, but I just want